Millionaire sees single dad with twins, breaks down in tears and shocks him with her next move. So here goes nothing. My name's James. I'm 38 years old. I live in a small town in Virginia. And for the past 4 years I've been raising my twin girls, Ava and Mia, completely on my own. They're 7 now. Wild, loud, ridiculous, and the absolute best thing that's ever happened to me. Everything I do, every single day, I do it for them. My setup isn't glamorous. Not even a little bit. I run a roadside fruit stand on Route 9, right at the edge of town where the old gas station used to be before it shut down. I've got a beat-up white canopy tent, 2 folding tables, a hand-painted wooden sign that Ava decorated with yellow suns because she said, "Fruit should look happy, Daddy." And that's pretty much it. I wake up at 4 in the morning, load the truck, and I'm out there before the sun finishes coming up. Some days I make enough to cover everything we need. Some days I drive home with half my inventory still unsold and I do the math in my head 12 different ways trying to make it work. But here's the thing, and I say this not to brag, not to perform some kind of toughness for you guys, but because it's just genuinely true. I am okay. Not okay like I've got it all figured out. Okay like I've learned to stand in the middle of hard things without falling over. That took me a long time. That cost me a lot. But I got there. What I'm about to tell you happened about 3 weeks ago, and I still think about it every single day. It started like any other Tuesday morning on Route 9. It was one of those mornings in early October where the air is cold enough that you can see your breath, but the sun comes up so sharp and golden it almost feels like an apology for the cold. You know that kind of morning? The light hits everything sideways, and for about 45 minutes the whole world looks like it's been dipped in honey. I had the girls with me because it was a teacher in service day and school was closed. They were wearing their matching navy blue hoodies, one of those twin mom purchases their aunt had made before everything fell apart with their mother. And Mia had somehow gotten her hair into what she called a bun, but was realistically just a knot held together by 2 pencils and sheer willpower. Ava had her notepad. She carries a notepad everywhere now. She says she's writing a book about our fruit stand. I told her I'd read every word when she's done. We'd been set up for about 2 hours when I first noticed the silver SUV slow down. It had been driving past on Route 9. Nice car, not flashy. The kind of clean and understated that actually costs more than flashy. And then it slowed, and then it stopped about 30 yards past my stand, and then it just sat there for a second. Like the driver was deciding something. I didn't think much of it at first. People slow down all the time. Half of them don't stop. But then the reverse lights came on and the car backed up slowly and pulled off onto the gravel shoulder right in front of my tables. The woman who got out was not who I expected. She was tall, maybe 5'9", with the kind of posture that comes from years of people taking her seriously in rooms full of other serious people. She was wearing a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my truck, and her hair was dark brown, pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but absolutely wasn't. She had these reading glasses pushed up on top of her head, like she'd forgotten they were there. She looked like she was in her mid-30s. Maybe. The kind of face that had lived some real life but hadn't been beaten down by it. Strong jaw, tired eyes, something tight sitting right behind them. The way grief sits when it's been living in someone for a very long time. She walked up to my stand and looked at everything. The peaches, the apples, the late-season tomatoes, the little handwritten price signs that Ava made, and I could see her processing it all, not like a customer browsing, but like someone who needed a moment to collect herself before she could speak. "Good morning," I said. She looked up at me and smiled, and it was a real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes, but there was something broken around the edges of it. "Good morning. Sorry. Your stand is beautiful." I glanced at my 2 folding tables and my hand-painted sign and my daughters stacking apples in a pyramid. "Thank you," I said, because what else do you say to that? Then Mia, without looking up from her apple pyramid, completely unbothered, said, "We painted the sign ourselves. The sun was my idea." The woman looked down at Mia, and something shifted in her face. Just for a second, like a window cracking. She pressed her lips together and nodded slowly and said, "I can tell. It's the best part." Ava looked up from her notepad. "Are you sad?" I started to step in. "Ava, come on. But the woman let out this short, quiet breath that was almost a laugh and almost wasn't, and she said, "A little bit, yeah. Daddy says sad feelings mean something important is trying to get your attention," Ava said, completely matter of fact, and then went back to her notepad. The woman, I didn't know her name yet, turned back to me, and her eyes were wet. She wasn't crying, not quite, but she was doing that thing where you're working very hard not to cry in front of a stranger. I recognized it. I'd done it myself more times than I could count. "I'll take everything," she said quietly. "Whatever you've got left. Now look, people buy big orders sometimes. It happens. But the way she said it wasn't like a catering buy or someone stocking up for the week. It was like she needed to do something with her hands, something concrete, something that would give the moment a shape she could hold on to. I started bagging everything up, and she stood there and she asked me my name, and I told her, and she told me hers. Lauren Caldwell. She said it like it was just a name, no context, nothing attached. I didn't push. She paid me cash, way too much. I told her the actual total, and she waved her hand and said, "Keep it." "Ma'am, that's almost 3 times. "James." She said my name very gently, very firmly, like a door closing. "Please, keep it." I kept it. She loaded the bags into her trunk herself, refused my help, and when she was done, she stood there for a second with her hand on the open trunk door, looking at nothing in particular. Ava had wandered over and was standing about 2 feet to her left, watching her with that unnerving, direct focus that 7-year-olds have before anyone teaches them it's rude to stare. "Will you come back?" Ava asked. Lauren looked down at her. Something moved across her face, complicated and fast, like weather. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly. Ava considered this very seriously. "We're here every day except Sunday," she said, "in case you decide you want to." Lauren closed her trunk. She looked at me over the roof of the car. Just for a second, this look I still can't fully describe. Like she was seeing something she'd almost given up on. And then she got in and drove away. I stood there on the gravel of Route 9, my 7-year-old daughter next to me, the October sun warm on the side of my face, and I felt something I genuinely was not prepared for. I felt seen. Now here's the part where I have to back up a little. Because for any of this to make sense, you need to understand where I was coming from. And where I was coming from was a place I still don't fully have the words for. 4 years ago, my marriage ended. And not in the quiet, drifting apart way that some marriages end. Mine ended on a Thursday afternoon in March when I came home early from a supply run and found a man named Greg Harlow sitting at my kitchen table drinking my coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. Greg Harlow. I want you to hold that name for a second because it's going to matter. He was 40 at the time, a few years older than me, with the kind of face that photographs well and the kind of eyes that are always doing math. The handshake type. The guy who says, "Let me know if there's anything I can do" at funerals and means absolutely none of it. He coached Little League in our town, sat on the board of 2 local charities, and had more friends than anyone who actually deserved friends should have. My wife Diana, we'd been together since we were 23, was standing in the kitchen doorway behind him, and the look on her face when she saw me was not the look of someone who'd been caught. It was the look of someone who'd already made a decision and was relieved the waiting was over. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She said, "James, we need to talk," in a voice so flat and practiced that I knew she'd rehearsed it, and the whole world just tilted. What followed was 3 months of the most disorienting pain I've ever felt. Not just the marriage ending, I could survive that, but the way it ended. The way Greg had been in our lives for over a year before that Thursday, always around, always helpful. Always the guy who offered to pick up the girls when I was working late. Always the guy who had just the right thing to say to Diana when she was stressed. I'd trusted him. I genuinely liked him. That part, the trusting and liking, was the thing that took the longest to recover from. Diana left. She moved into a house across town that Greg helped her rent. She asked for minimal custody at first. She said she needed time to settle in, that's the exact phrase she used. Settle in, like the girls were furniture she'd get around to arranging later. I said fine, because what choice did I have? I had Ava and Mia, and I had Route 9, and I had 4 in the morning, and I had the slow, quiet, grinding work of rebuilding a life out of the pieces of the one that got broken. Greg and Diana lasted about 8 months before he moved on to something newer and shinier. Diana, to her credit, seemed to wake up after that. Tried to be more present with the girls, showed up more, genuinely tried. We were civil. We co-parented. It wasn't warm, but it was workable. But Greg just kept on living. Kept coaching Little League. Kept sitting on his boards. Kept shaking hands and saying, "Let me know if there's anything I can do" at funerals. That used to eat at me. I won't pretend it didn't. The injustice of it, the way someone can blow up another person's entire world and then just keep going. Completely unaffected, reputation intact, life unchanged. I used to lie awake at night thinking about it, not planning anything, just feeling the weight of how unfair it was, the way you press on a bruise just to remind yourself it's still there. But by the time Lauren Caldwell pulled over on Route 9, I'd mostly let that go. Or I thought I had. Turns out some things don't let go of you just because you let go of them. She came back the next morning. I was honestly surprised. Ava was not. Ava had, apparently, simply known. Lauren pulled up at 7:15 with 2 coffees in a carrier and a slightly uncertain look on her face. Like she'd talked herself into this and was still mid-negotiation with herself about whether it was a good idea. She handed me one of the coffees without a word, and I took it, and we stood there for a second in the cold morning air. And then she said, "I thought about what your daughter said, about sad feelings trying to get your attention." "She's 7, I said. "Take it with a grain of salt." "No," Lauren said quietly. "She's right." And that was kind of how it started. She didn't stay long that first morning, maybe 20 minutes. She bought a bag of Honeycrisp apples. She asked me how long I'd been running the stand. She told me she was in development, real estate, commercial properties, and that she'd grown up about 40 miles north of here and moved back to the area a couple years ago after spending most of her adult life in bigger cities. She didn't tell me why she'd cried the day before. I didn't ask. Some things have their own timing. What I noticed was this. She was careful with her words in a way that felt practiced, like someone who'd learned the hard way to think before they spoke. But she was also curious in a way that felt completely unguarded. She asked about the girls, what they were into, whether Ava had always been a writer. She listened to the answers like they actually mattered. Mia, for her part, had decided Lauren was acceptable and demonstrated this by explaining in full detail her current theory about why peaches taste better when they're slightly imperfect looking. Lauren listened to the entire thing with complete seriousness and said, "That's actually been proven, I think. Something about the sugar concentrating near the bruised parts." Mia pointed at her like a prosecutor. "See, Daddy? I told you." I drove home that evening thinking about a woman in a camel coat who bought all my fruit and came back the next day with coffee. And underneath that, quieter further down, there. I was thinking about Greg Harlow. Because of something Lauren had said in passing. Almost nothing really, just a name that dropped into the conversation while she was talking about a zoning dispute at a property she was developing on the east side of town. She'd mentioned Greg's name, not like she knew him well. More like he was a fixture, a presence, a name that comes up in certain conversations in a certain kind of town. "You know Greg Harlow?" I'd asked, keeping my voice completely even. Something shifted in her expression. Quick, almost invisible. "Not personally," she said. "But yeah, he's on the county planning board now." His name comes up. I nodded like it was nothing. But on the drive home with the girls singing along to something on the radio, and the last of the October light dying out over the fields, I felt something wake up in my chest that had been asleep for a long time. Not anger. Not quite. Something older than anger. Something patient. When Lauren started coming around more, and she did almost every morning that week, always with 2 coffees, always a little less uncertain than the day before, I told myself I wasn't reading into it. I told myself she was just a woman who liked fresh fruit and early mornings and talking to someone who didn't want anything from her. I told myself I was being practical, realistic, the same way I'd taught myself to be practical and realistic about everything else in my life since Diana left. But here's the thing about being alone for 4 years. And I mean really alone. Not just single, but that specific kind of alone where you've restructured your entire self around absence. You forget what it feels like when someone is genuinely interested in you. Not your situation, not your story, not the version of you that makes them feel good about themselves for paying attention. Just you. Lauren was interested in me, and I didn't know what to do with that. By Friday of that first week, she was staying longer. An hour. Sometimes more. She'd lean against the side of my truck with her coffee and we'd talk while I made change for customers, and Ava read her book on the tailgate, and Mia reorganized my displays in ways I hadn't asked for, but honestly were usually better than how I'd had them. Lauren never looked like she was in a hurry. For someone who ran her own company, managed multiple properties, and clearly had a calendar full of things that needed her attention, she had this remarkable ability to just be somewhere without one foot already out the door. On Thursday, she told me a little more about herself. Not everything. She was measured about it, deliberate, like someone laying down stepping stones one at a time. But enough. She'd built her development company from nothing. Started with one small commercial property she'd bought with savings and a loan from a credit union that gave her worse terms than they'd have given a man with half her qualifications. She'd been in Chicago for most of her 30s. She'd come back to Virginia because she wanted to slow down, or thought she did, and because she had things here she needed to face. She didn't say what things. Not yet. What she did say, on that Friday morning, standing in the October cold with frost on the grass behind her and steam rising from her coffee cup, was this: I had a daughter. Just like that. Right in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely. I think we'd been talking about the girls' school, some fundraiser Ava was excited about, and she just said it. Past tense. Had. I looked at her. Mia was inside the truck with the heat on. Drawing. Ava was at the far end of the table, deeply absorbed in her own world. It was just Lauren and me and the cold and whatever had just opened up between us. What happened? I asked. She wrapped both hands around her cup, stared into the middle distance the way people do when they're deciding how far to go. I left, she said. And the flatness in her voice wasn't cold, it was the opposite of cold. It was what a voice sounds like when it's been carrying something so heavy for so long that all the inflection has been pressed out of it. I had her with someone I was young and stupid with, and we split up. And I was 24 and terrified, and I had this company that was barely standing up. And I told myself I was leaving so I could build something, so I could come back stronger, so I could give her a better life eventually. She stopped. But you didn't come back, I said quietly. Not soon enough, she said. By the time I tried, she was 8, and I was a stranger to her. Her dad had done everything. He'd been everything, and she looked at me like... She stopped again, jaw tight, and I watched her swallow whatever was trying to come up. She looked at me the same way Ava looked at me that first morning. Like she was trying to figure out if you were safe, I said. Lauren looked at me then. Really looked at me. And nodded. Once. We didn't say much after that. But something settled between us that morning. Something quiet and significant. The way sediment settles after water's been disturbed. Like two people who'd been carrying similar shapes of pain recognizing each other. I drove home that evening and I sat on the back porch after the girls were in bed, and I thought about her. About the way she'd said I left. Not as an excuse, not wrapped in justification, just as the plain, awful truth. And I thought about how much courage it takes to say a thing like that out loud to a virtual stranger. How most people will carry their worst decisions all the way to the grave, rather than speak them into the open air. I thought about Greg Harlow. About how his name had come up again that morning. Different context this time. Lauren had mentioned he'd been pushing back on a development permit she'd applied for. Nothing personal, she said. Just county board bureaucracy. He had opinions about zoning on the east side of town that didn't align with her project. Does he usually get in the way of things like that? I'd asked. She'd shrugged, casual. Greg Harlow gets in the way of anything that doesn't benefit Greg Harlow. That's kind of his whole thing. She'd said it lightly, offhand, like it was just a known quantity. A feature of the local landscape, like a pothole on a road you've learned to steer around. But the way she said it, That's kind of his whole thing. It landed in me like a stone in still water. Because I knew that was true. I'd always known it, all the way back to when he was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, and my wife and my whole future quietly unraveling around him. Greg Harlow got in the way of things that didn't benefit Greg Harlow. He always had. And what really got me was that nobody seemed to be doing anything about it. The following Tuesday was when things started moving. It was a gray morning, no honey light, no frost magic, just flat November gray sky and a wind coming in from the north that made everything feel unfinished. I'd been out since 4:30. The girls were with Diana that morning, one of our regular custody days, so it was just me in the stand and a thermos of bad coffee and my own head for company. Lauren pulled up at 7:53. I know the exact time because I'd just checked my phone to see if Mia had texted me about something she'd forgotten at home. She'd started texting me this year. Little 7-year-old texts with 0 punctuation that I will genuinely treasure for the rest of my life. Lauren got out of her car, and she looked different. Still put together, still that same straight-backed composure, but there was something moving behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. Faster. More urgent. "You okay?" I asked before she even got to the table. She set her bag down on the tailgate and looked at me and said, "James, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay." "Greg Harlow," she said. "He's more than just someone who messed with your marriage, isn't he?" I went very still. "What makes you ask that?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She set it on the table between us, on top of a pile of Honeycrisp apples, which is a sentence I never expected to say in my life. I looked at it without picking it up. It was a printed email chain. I could see Greg's name in the header. "I have a contact at the county planning office," she said, "someone who's worked there for 12 years and doesn't like Greg very much. Last week she sent me this." I picked it up. I read it twice, and then I set it back down very carefully and looked at Lauren. "He blocked my permit," she said, voice even. "Not because of zoning, because somebody told him I'd been spending time out here and somebody told him whose fruit stand this was. His assistant made 3 calls to county contacts last week. My permit was flagged for review the next day. The cold morning air felt different on my skin after I read that. Like the temperature had dropped another 5 degrees in a single second. "He did this because of me," I said. It wasn't a question. "He did this because he's the kind of person who hits people sideways," Lauren said. "He doesn't come at you directly. He never has. He finds the things near you and applies pressure there." I knew that. God, I knew that. I'd learned that the hard way years ago. Not all at once, but in pieces, gradually. The way you put together a picture from the wrong side of the table. "Lauren," I said slowly, "how much do you know about what he did to my family?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Enough," she said. "Small town. People talk. And I've been asking some questions since I met you." "Why?" She was quiet for a second. The wind moved through the canopy of the tent and made it ripple. "Because," she said, "I know what it looks like when someone does real damage to a person and just walks away clean. I've seen that before, up close." And something in the way she said it, up close, made me understand that we weren't just talking about me anymore. That whatever Greg had done to my life, Lauren had her own version of that story. A different man, maybe. A different kind of damage, but the same fundamental thing. Someone who breaks what isn't theirs and faces no consequence. I folded the email and set it back on the table. "What are you going to do about the permit?" I asked. She picked up her coffee. "Appeal it. Win it. That part I'm not worried about." "And the other part?" She looked at me over the rim of her cup, and her eyes were very steady and very clear. "I've been a long time getting here, James," she said quietly. "I left my daughter. I ran from hard things. I let people like Greg Harlow exist in my periphery without doing anything about it because I was too focused on building and running and moving forward." She paused. "I'm done running," she said. I didn't say anything. "I have documentation," she said, "from my own experience with him, not what he did to you. That's yours. But there's a pattern, and patterns are provable. The word documentation landed in my stomach like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was there. Lauren. Yeah. When you say documentation, what kind of documentation are we talking about? She set her cup down. She looked at me with that same expression she'd had the very first morning. The one I couldn't fully name, but that I recognized as someone who had been carrying something enormous and had just decided, finally, that they were done carrying it alone. The kind that doesn't go away, she said. And the gray November sky pressed down over Route 9, and the wind moved through the apples, and somewhere in me, somewhere quiet, somewhere that had been waiting for a very long time, something woke up. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when something big is about to move. Not a peaceful silence. Not the kind you get on a Sunday morning when the girls are still asleep and the house is soft and warm and nothing needs to be done yet. This is a different kind. Pressurized. Like the air right before a storm when the birds go quiet and the leaves turn their undersides up and everything living seems to hold its breath at once. That's what the next few days felt like. Lauren and I didn't make any dramatic declarations. We didn't sit down and draft a plan over a table covered in papers like some kind of movie scene. It wasn't like that. It was quieter than that, and slower, and in some ways that made it feel more real, more serious, than any dramatic moment could have. Real things don't usually arrive with music. They arrive in the margins, in the pauses between ordinary sentences. She came back Wednesday morning, then Thursday. We talked, the way we'd been talking, about the girls, about her work, about nothing in particular. But underneath all of it there was this new current. This awareness that something had been said that couldn't be unsaid, and that we were both quietly deciding what to do with it. On Thursday she mentioned Greg's name again, casually, like a test she wasn't sure she was running. His name came up in a meeting yesterday, she said. Apparently he's been making calls about my other project too. The one on Miller Road. I looked at her. He's escalating. He does that when he thinks he's found a pressure point, she said. Meaning me. Meaning you. I set down the apple I'd been wrapping and leaned against the table and just thought about that for a second, about the fact that Greg Harlow, a man who had sat in my kitchen and dismantled my marriage and walked away without a scratch, was now, 4 years later, still reaching into my life, still applying pressure, not because I'd done anything to threaten him, just because I existed near something he wanted to control. Does he know we've been talking? I asked. Probably, Lauren said. Small town, someone always knows something. And that's why he blocked the permit. That's why he blocked the permit. I nodded slowly. Outside, a truck rolled past on Route 9 and Mia waved at it from the tailgate even though she had no idea who it was. The driver waved back. She does that, waves at strangers like they're people she simply hasn't met yet. Lauren, I said, tell me about the documentation. She was quiet for a moment, not hesitant, more like organizing, like someone pulling open a drawer they haven't opened in a while, making sure they know what's in it before they start taking things out. 3 years ago, she said, I was trying to put together a development deal on a commercial lot just outside the county line. Medium-sized project, nothing complicated. I needed a variance on the property's classification to make it work. Routine request. I'd done similar ones a dozen times in other counties. Let me guess, I said. Greg was on the variance board at the time, she said. He approved it, but only after I agreed to bring in a contractor he recommended. Guy named Dale Pruitt. Ring any bells? I thought about it. Vaguely. Does work around town? Did, Lauren said. He retired, or whatever you want to call it, about 18 months ago. But back then he was Greg's guy, had been for years. Every project Greg touched, Dale Pruitt was somewhere nearby collecting a fee. Sometimes he actually did the work. Sometimes he just collected the fee. I looked at her. Greg was taking a cut. Greg was taking a cut, she said. No drama in her voice at all, just the plain geometry of it. I couldn't prove it at the time, I suspected, but suspicion doesn't do anything. So I paid Dale, I got my variance, I moved on. But I kept the records, every payment, every email, every meeting note. For 3 years. For 3 years. Why? I asked. Not challenging her, genuinely curious. Most people would have just let it go. She looked at me steadily. Because I've spent most of my adult life letting things go that I should have stood in front of, she said. My daughter. My own history. Things that were wrong and I walked past because it was easier or faster or safer to keep moving. I kept those records because somewhere in me I knew that one day it was going to matter. That Greg Harlow was going to do this to someone who couldn't just absorb it and move on. And I wanted to be ready. The wind came through and rustled the paper bags on my table. Ava looked up from her notepad, decided nothing interesting was happening, and went back to writing. There's more, Lauren said. Tell me. About 8 months ago, I started hearing things from other developers. Women mostly, but not only women. A few smaller operators who don't have the pull to push back. Greg had been running the same play on different people for years. Recommend a contractor, approve the permit, take the cut. Sometimes it was Pruitt. Sometimes it was someone else on his list. Always the same structure. He built a system, I said. He built a system, she confirmed. And the reason nobody's ever gone after it formally is because each individual instance looks like normal business. One permit, one contractor recommendation, one project. You need the whole picture, you need the pattern. And you have the pattern. She reached into her bag, that same bag she'd set on my tailgate days earlier, and pulled out a manila folder, thick, and set it on the table between us. I didn't open it. I just looked at it. That's copies, she said. Originals are with my attorney. Have been for about 4 months. I finally picked it up, opened it. Inside were emails, payment records, meeting logs, a timeline someone had typed up in small, clear font, a list of names I half recognized from around town, and at the bottom, a single handwritten note on yellow legal paper that said, in very clean printing, pattern established. Waiting for the right moment. I looked up at her. You've been building this, I said. I've been building this, she said. The permit he blocked, your project on the east side, is the right moment, she said. I need to stop here and tell you guys something, because I think some of you might be reading this and wondering why I didn't just feel relief. Why I didn't pump my fist or feel that electric burst of finally that you'd expect from a man who'd spent 4 years watching the guy who wrecked his life stroll around town untouchable. The truth is more complicated than that. The truth is that what I felt, standing there at my fruit stand in November with a folder full of evidence against Greg Harlow sitting in my hands, was something close to grief. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about justice when it actually shows up after you'd given up expecting it. It doesn't erase anything. It doesn't give back the years. It doesn't put you back in your kitchen on that Thursday morning before everything changed and hand you a different outcome. It just corrects the record, sets the account straight. And there's something almost unbearably sad about that, alongside everything else you feel. I thought about Ava, age 3, asking me every night for 2 weeks after Diana left where Mommy was sleeping. I thought about Mia, who stopped eating much for a month and, when I finally got her to tell me why, said she was scared that if she wasn't quiet enough I'd leave too. I thought about 4 a.m. and Route 9, and the specific loneliness of lying awake next to an empty half of a bed you used to share with someone. None of that goes away because Greg Harlow finally gets what's coming to him. But maybe it matters less. Maybe it gets lighter. Maybe that's enough. I handed the folder back to Lauren, What do you need from me? I asked. She shook her head. Nothing. This isn't your fight to carry, James. He came after my family, I said quietly. It's partly my fight. I know, she said. But what I have is enough. What I need from you is to let me do this the right way. Through the right channels. Clean. Clean, I repeated. No drama, no confrontation, no giving him anything he can use against either of us, she said. Just evidence, just process, just the truth, documented and submitted to people whose job it is to act on it. I looked at her for a long moment. You've thought about this for a while. I've thought about this for 3 years, she said, and almost smiled. That night I put the girls to bed. Mia fell asleep mid-sentence the way she always does, just drops off like a light switch. And Ava stayed up an extra 20 minutes, insisting she needed to finish 1 more page of her book, which I allowed because I am weak in the specific way that fathers of determined 7-year-olds are weak. And then I sat on the back porch again in the dark and I just let myself think. I thought about Greg coaching Little League with that big open smile. I thought about him at the county board meetings, reasonable, collegial, the guy who always had a good word and a firm handshake. I thought about the permit he'd blocked out of pure spite, not because of zoning, not because of policy, but because James Cole's fruit stand was connected to something that made him feel like he needed to apply pressure. I thought about all the people in that folder, small operators, people without Lauren's resources or Lauren's patience or Lauren's 3 years of meticulous documentation, people who just absorbed it and moved on, because what else can you do when the system is being operated by the person the system is supposed to check? And I thought about Lauren, about the way she'd said "I'm done running" standing at my tailgate in the gray November cold, meaning every syllable. I'd been running too, in my own way. Not from town, not literally. I'd stayed, I'd built, I'd kept showing up every morning at 4 a.m., but inside myself I'd been running from the anger, from the injustice of it. I'd convinced myself that letting it go was the same thing as being at peace with it, and those are not the same thing. Not even close. Letting go means releasing your grip on something. Being at peace means you've actually set it down. I'd let go without ever setting it down, which meant I'd been carrying it the whole time without the benefit of even being able to hold on to it properly. Lauren wasn't asking me to hold it anymore. She was asking me to let her carry it the rest of the way. And I know, that the reason that felt so disorienting was because nobody had offered to carry anything for me in a very long time. You get used to it. 4 years of being the only one, the only adult, the only person between your kids and whatever the world decides to throw. You stop expecting anyone to step alongside you. You stop leaving room for it. You build yourself so solid and so self-sufficient that the idea of someone showing up and saying, "Let me help," almost feels like a threat. Almost, but not quite. I went inside, checked on the girls. Mia's left foot was hanging off the bed the way it always does. She sleeps like she fell from a great height. Ava had her notepad tucked under her pillow. I went to bed, and for the first time in a very long time I slept straight through until the alarm. The next morning Lauren called instead of coming by. Her early meeting ran over, she said, but she wanted me to know that she'd submitted the formal appeal on the permit, and that she'd placed a call to someone at the state contractor licensing board, and that the folder, the full folder, the one with 3 years in it, was being reviewed by someone she described only as a friend who takes this kind of thing seriously. "How long does this take?" I asked. "A few weeks," she said. "Maybe less. These things have their own speed." "And Greg?" She paused. "Greg doesn't know yet," she said. "He thinks this is still just a permit dispute. He thinks he's in control of how this goes." I stood at the fruit stand alone in the morning cold, phone against my ear, and I looked out at Route 9 and the gray sky above it and the bare November trees lining the shoulder. "Good," I said. And I meant it in a way that went much deeper than one word should be able to go. There's something nobody prepares you for when justice starts moving. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come in with the energy you spent years imagining it would have. That cinematic crash of consequence. The moment where everything reverses, and the person who hurt you finally understands the full weight of what they did. It doesn't work like that in real life. In real life, justice moves the way water moves through rock. Slow. Patient. Invisible from the outside until suddenly the rock just isn't there anymore. I had to keep reminding myself of that over the next 2 weeks, because from where I was standing, on Route 9 every morning with my apples and my tangerines and my 2 daughters and my thermos of coffee, nothing looked different. Greg Harlow was still Greg Harlow. He was still coaching Little League, still sitting on his county board, still shaking hands at the hardware store on Saturday mornings the way men like him have always shaken hands. Like the handshake itself is a performance, like they're always half aware of who might be watching. I saw him once during those 2 weeks, just in passing. I was driving the girls to school and he was coming out of the diner on Clement Street, paper cup in hand, talking to someone I didn't recognize. He looked exactly the same. That was the part that got me, if I'm honest. He looked totally fine, comfortable in his skin, unbothered by the universe. Mia was in the back seat asking me something about whether fish sleep, and I watched Greg Harlow laugh at something his companion said, and I felt a complicated knot of things move through my chest. Anger, yes, but also something almost like pity. Because he had absolutely no idea. He was standing there laughing in front of the diner, and somewhere on the other side of town, there was a manila folder that had been building toward this moment for 3 years, and he didn't feel it coming at all. That's the thing about people like Greg. They stop believing consequences are real because they've avoided them for so long. After a while, the absence of consequence becomes its own kind of arrogance. They start moving through the world like they're exempt. Like the rules are for other people, smaller people, less connected people, people without Greg Harlow's particular talent for being liked by the right people at the right time. I drove the girls to school. Mia got her answer about fish. Yes, they do sleep, just not the way we do. And Ava left her backpack in the truck and had to run back for it, which is a thing she does at least twice a week, and which I have completely given up trying to solve. I watched them go through the school doors, and I sat in the parking lot for a minute in the quiet, and I thought about Lauren. Not about what she was doing. About her. Because something had been shifting between us quietly, in the background of everything else. And I want to be straight with you guys about that because I think it matters to the story, not as some romantic subplot dropped in to soften the edges, but because it was genuinely part of how I was processing all of it. Lauren had started staying longer in the mornings. 2 hours sometimes. She'd sit on the tailgate of my truck. She'd claim that spot like it was hers now, and I'd stopped pretending I minded. And we'd talk while I worked. Real talking. The kind where you stop censoring yourself mid-sentence because you've stopped worrying about how you're coming across. She told me more about her daughter. Her name was Cassie. She said it carefully, like the name was fragile, like it might mean something different depending on the air around it. Cassie was 11 now. Lauren had been working on rebuilding that relationship for 3 years, slowly, with the help of Cassie's father. A decent man named Paul, who Lauren spoke about with a kind of grateful respect that told me everything I needed to know about who he was. He could have made it impossible, she said one morning. He had every right to. I left. He didn't owe me anything after that. But he didn't, I said. He told Cassie the truth, Lauren said. Not his version of the truth, just the truth. That her mom was going through something hard and made choices she couldn't take back. And that it didn't mean she didn't love her. She looked out at the road. I've never been able to fully explain to him what that meant to me. Some things don't fit in words. I thought about Diana, about how different that was, and how much I'd wished in those first awful months that there was a Paul in my situation. Someone on the other side of the wreckage who was choosing grace instead of war. Cassie's coming to visit in December, Lauren said. First time she stayed more than a day. That's big, I said. It's terrifying, she said, and laughed, and it was the most unguarded sound I'd heard from her yet. Loose and genuine, and a little watery at the edges. You'll be fine, I said. She looked at me. How do you know? Because you drove 40 miles back to a small town to face the things you ran from, I said. Because you kept a folder for 3 years. Because you bought all my fruit on a Tuesday morning in October when you didn't have to stop at all. She was quiet for a moment. James. Yeah. I'm really glad I stopped. I didn't say anything to that. But I also didn't look away. It was a Thursday, 12 days after Lauren had submitted the formal complaint, when things started to move in a way I could actually see. I know it was Thursday because it was Diana's custody morning and I was alone at the stand. And I always feel the specific texture of those mornings differently. Quieter, more exposed, like the stand is missing 2 of its main structural supports. I function fine. I just noticed the absence. Lauren pulled up at her usual time. But she was different that morning, wound tighter, moving faster. That particular energy of someone who has been waiting a long time for a phone to ring, and it finally did. She got out of the car and didn't even go through the usual ritual of getting coffee from the carrier. She just walked straight to me and said, "The licensing board made contact with Greg yesterday." I set down what I was doing. "They sent a formal notice of investigation," she said. "Standard procedure. They notify the subject that a complaint has been filed and that records will be requested. He would have gotten it yesterday afternoon." "So he knows," I said. "He knows something is moving," she said. "He doesn't know the full scope yet. He doesn't know how much is in that folder, but he knows someone filed and the board doesn't send investigation notices for small stuff. I thought about Greg coming out of the diner, the comfortable laugh, the unbothered posture. How's he going to react? I asked. Badly, Lauren said. Men like Greg, their first move when they feel threatened is to find out who's responsible and apply pressure. He's going to start making calls today if he hasn't already. To you? Probably to people around me first, she said. See if he can find the leak, see if he can figure out what he's actually dealing with before he commits to a response. And when he figures out it's you? She picked up her coffee finally, took a slow sip. Then he'll come at me directly. He'll try to discredit me. He'll imply I have a personal agenda, which I do, but not the kind he'll try to make it look like. He'll pull out every professional complaint he can find or manufacture and wave it around to anyone who'll listen. That doesn't scare you, I said. No, she said simply, because everything he'll do in the next 2 weeks is going to be reactive. He's playing catch-up. I've had 3 years. He has. Whatever he can pull together in a panic. There was a certainty in her voice that I found, I don't know how else to say this, genuinely moving. Not because it was impressive, though it was, but because underneath the certainty I could hear all the years it had cost her. All the mornings she'd added another document to that folder instead of letting it go. All the time she could have decided it wasn't worth it and moved on and didn't. 3 years of quiet. Patient, meticulous refusal to let a wrong thing stay wrong. Lauren, I said. Yeah. Whatever happens with all of this, however it goes, I want you to know that watching you do this has changed something in me. She looked at me carefully. What do you mean? I mean I'd given up on the idea that it was possible, I said. The accounting. The thing where what someone does actually catches up with them. I'd filed it under things that happen in movies but not on Route 9, and I know this isn't over yet and I know it might not end perfectly. But just watching you, the way you've built this, the way you're not shaking, the way you came in here this morning ready? I stopped, shook my head a little. You've got more faith in it than I do, I said, in the idea that the truth matters, that it's worth documenting and carrying and waiting on. She looked at me for a long moment. The November wind moved between us. I didn't used to, she said quietly. I used to think moving fast was the same thing as moving forward. Leave the hard stuff behind, keep building, don't look back. She paused. Cassie taught me that wasn't true. You can't outrun the things that matter. They just wait. I nodded. Greg's been waiting too, she said. He just didn't know it. The call came that same afternoon. Not to me, to Lauren. But she told me about it the next morning, and the way she described it, I could picture every second of it. Greg called her cell directly. She said his voice was warm and measured and utterly controlled. The voice of a man who has practiced being reasonable under pressure until it's become reflexive. He said he'd received some unusual correspondence from the licensing board. Probably just a mix-up. These things happen. Wondered if she'd heard anything similar. Wanted to make sure there wasn't some kind of miscommunication that was making things unnecessarily complicated for both of them. He was fishing, Lauren said. Did he catch anything? I asked. I told him I wasn't aware of any issues with my own licensure and suggested he speak with his attorney, she said. Completely pleasant. Very professional. And he paused for about 3 seconds, which for Greg is a very long pause. And then he said, very carefully, that he hoped we could keep things collegial given our overlapping professional circles. Meaning don't make this a fight, I said. Meaning he was already worried, she said. I let that sit for a second. Lauren, I said, when the full scope lands on him, when he sees everything in that folder and understands how long you've been building it, what do you think he does? She looked out at Route 9. A car went by, then a truck, then quiet. I think he realizes, she said slowly, that the version of himself he's been presenting to this town for 20 years, the coach, the board member, the community guy, I think he realizes that version is going to have to answer for the real one, and I think that's going to be the hardest thing he's ever faced. Not the legal process, not the financial exposure. The moment when the people who shook his hand every Saturday morning at the hardware store read his name in a different context and feel something different when they think about him. She picked up a peach from my table, turned it over in her hands. Reputation is all Greg Harlow actually has, she said. Everything else, the influence, the board seats, the Little League photos, it all runs on reputation. Take that out from under him and there's nothing holding any of it up. She set the peach back down. He built his whole life on what people think of him, she said. And he never once considered that the people he hurt were keeping records. Outside, the trees on Route 9 were bare now, just dark lines against the gray sky, and somewhere down the road a door was about to open that Greg Harlow had been standing in front of for years without knowing it. He'd put himself there. He just didn't know that yet. I've been asked before, by guys in communities like this one, by friends who know pieces of the story, whether I ever felt guilty, whether watching someone's life come apart, even someone who genuinely deserved it, ever sat wrong with me, whether I lost sleep over it. I want to answer that honestly, because I think it matters. The answer is no. And I spent a long time making sure I understood why before I let myself be comfortable with that answer, because I don't think no should come easy in a situation like this. I think you owe it to yourself to actually examine it. To sit with the question long enough that you know your answer is real and not just something your ego manufactured to make you feel clean. What I felt, what I genuinely, honestly felt as those weeks unfolded, was not satisfaction in someone else's pain. It wasn't the hot, ugly pleasure of revenge the way people imagine revenge feels. It was something quieter and more fundamental than that. It was the feeling of a world that had been slightly tilted for 4 years very slowly, very gradually, beginning to level out. That's the only way I know how to describe it. A world leveling out. The second week of November arrived cold and sharp. The kind of cold that gets into the old joints of old buildings and makes them talk at night. My truck had started making a new sound. A low, intermittent groan from somewhere under the hood that I'd been diplomatically ignoring for about 3 weeks, and the furnace in our rental house kicked on for the first time since March, and immediately smelled like something small had died in it over the summer, which sent Mia into a very passionate 10-minute investigation of every vent in the house. She found nothing, reported back with great seriousness. "I think it's a ghost, Daddy." "Probably," I said. "Ghosts smell like burning dust," she informed me. "Is that a fact?" "Yes," she said, and walked away like the matter was settled. I tell you this because I want you to understand that life was still just life. The stand, the girls, the bad truck noise, the ghost in the furnace. The world wasn't on pause while justice moved. Everything was still happening at the same time, in the same overlapping, slightly chaotic, deeply ordinary way it always had. That's the part that's hard to explain about this period, how something enormous and years in the making was moving underneath the surface of completely regular days. Lauren and I had settled into something that I still don't have a clean label for, and I'm not sure I need one. She came by most mornings. Sometimes she stayed 2 hours, sometimes 20 minutes. We talked about everything and nothing. She brought the girls small things, not extravagant, nothing that felt like she was trying to buy her way into their lives, just thoughtful things that said I paid attention. A set of colored pens for Ava's notepad. A book about deep-sea creatures for Mia, who had by this point announced that she intended to become either a marine biologist or a professional napper, and was keeping her options open. Mia received the deep-sea book with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious texts. She slept with it for 3 nights. Lauren watched all of this with an expression I recognized after a while. Not longing exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of someone watching a life that could have been theirs, in a different version of events, and allowing themselves to feel that without running from it. I never commented on it. I just let her look. One morning, I think it was the 9th or 10th of November, she arrived later than usual, and there was something different in her posture when she got out of the car. Not alarmed. More like a person who has just watched a long-running weather pattern finally do what they always predicted it would do. "The board submitted a formal records request to the county planning office yesterday," she said, before she'd even reached the table. "Every permit application Greg was involved in for the past 7 years. Every contractor recommendation. Every variance approval." I looked at her. 7 years. 7 years, she confirmed. "That's their standard scope for this type of investigation, but my contact at the planning office says Greg's involvement goes back at least 10. So they'll find more than what's in your folder." Almost certainly, she said. My folder is 3 years. Whatever's in those county records, that's the other 4. Maybe more. Things I didn't even know about. I thought about that. About how a thing can be so much larger than you even realized. About how Greg had built this whole quiet architecture of favors and cuts and pressure and influence over a decade, right in the middle of an ordinary small town. While everyone shook his hand on Saturday mornings and watched him coach Little League and thought he was just a solid guy doing good work. Has he responded to the records request? I asked. He has to comply, Lauren said. He doesn't have a choice, but... She paused and something moved across her face. My contact says there was a visit to the planning office. Yesterday afternoon after business hours, Greg came in personally. To do what? She doesn't know exactly. She wasn't there. But 2 of the filing clerks were, and they said he spent about 40 minutes in the records room. I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the November air. Lauren. I know, she said. I know, James. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were very alert. Which is why I called my attorney last night and made sure that everything we submitted, our copies, our documentation, our timeline, is formally logged with the board as of 3 weeks ago. Whatever he did or didn't touch in that room, he can't reach what we already put in front of them. I breathed out slowly. He's panicking, I said. He's panicking, she agreed. And here's what I want you to understand about that moment, because I think it's important. There was no triumph in the way Lauren said those words. No heat, no relish. She said he's panicking the way a surgeon says the procedure went as expected. Steady, professional, the quiet authority of someone who prepared for every contingency and is now watching the preparation pay off exactly the way they calculated it would. That's when I understood fully what 3 years of patience actually looks like when it arrives at its destination. The story got out on a Friday. Not the full story, not yet, but enough. Someone at the county planning office talked, not Lauren's contact. Someone else, someone who'd seen the records request and put together what it meant and told someone they trusted. Who told someone else. The way things always move in small towns, not maliciously, but unstoppably. Like water finding the path of least resistance. By Friday afternoon, I was hearing it at the stand. A regular customer, older guy, retired, came by every week for persimmons. Mentioned it while I was making his change. You hear anything about the planning board? Something about Greg Harlow? What kind of something, I asked, keeping my voice completely neutral. Don't know exactly. Somebody said there's an investigation, some kind of contractor thing. He shrugged. Probably nothing, Greg's solid. Probably, I said. He took his persimmons and left. I stood there in the cold air and I thought about the word solid. How many times I'd heard that word attached to Greg Harlow's name over the years. Greg's solid. Greg's a good guy. Greg really cares about this community. The word had been so attached to him for so long it had started to feel structural. Load-bearing, like removing it would cause something to collapse. I called Lauren that evening after the girls were in bed. People are talking, I said. I know, she said. My phone's been active today. People asking indirect questions, trying to figure out what I know. Greg's people, mostly. His people, I repeated. He has people. Every Greg Harlow has people, she said. A buffer layer of people who've benefited enough from the proximity to feel like they have a stake in protecting him. They're not bad people necessarily. They just have the wrong information and the wrong loyalties, and they're going to have to update both. How are you feeling about all of it? I asked. She was quiet for a second, genuinely considering. Like a person standing at the end of a very long road, she said finally. Tired. But not the bad kind. The kind where you're tired because you actually made it somewhere. I understood that completely. I understood it in my bones. James, she said. Can I ask you something? Yeah. After this is over, and it's going to be over one way or another soon, what do you want? Not about Greg, not about any of this. Just for yourself. For the girls. I sat with that question for a moment. It's a deceptively simple question. What do you want? But when you've spent 4 years operating entirely in survival mode, when every morning has been about getting through and providing and holding the line, the question of what you actually want can feel almost foreign. like a language you used to speak and have gotten rusty in. I want to stop waiting for the other shoe, I said finally. I want to wake up in the morning without that background thing, and you know that thing. That low hum of waiting for something to go wrong. I want that to stop. Yeah, she said softly. And I want the girls to grow up knowing that their dad didn't just survive, that he actually built something, that he stood in something good. You're already doing that, she said. I know, I said. But I want to feel it more than I currently do. She didn't say anything for a moment. What about you? I asked. What do you want? I want December to go well, she said, and I knew she meant Cassie. I want to not be the person who ran anymore. I want to be the person who came back and stayed. You're already doing that too, I said. She laughed, soft, genuine. Maybe we're both better at this than we give ourselves credit for. Maybe, I said. The following Monday was the day Greg called me. I wasn't expecting it. I don't know why I wasn't. It was the logical move when you think about it. He'd called Lauren. He'd visited the records room. He'd sent his people to make quiet inquiries. The next logical target was me. I just hadn't quite prepared myself for the specific reality of seeing his name on my phone screen on a cold Monday morning while I was setting up the stand alone. I stared at it for 2 rings. 3. Then I picked up. James. His voice was exactly how Lauren had described it. Warm, measured, controlled, like a man who learned very young that tone is its own kind of armor. Hey, it's Greg Harlow. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I'm setting up the stand, I said. Right, Route 9, I drive past there sometimes. Casual. Offhand, establishing the geography of things, reminding me of his presence in my world. Listen, I'll keep it short. I just wanted to reach out man to man. I think there might be some confusion going around about some professional matters, and I wanted to be direct with you. Okay, I said. I know you and I haven't always. I know there's some history there. James, and I've always regretted how things went with you and Diana. I want you to know that. I said nothing. He paused, recalibrating. I've heard your name connected to some things recently. I don't know what Lauren Caldwell's told you, but she's got an axe to grind professionally, and I'd hate to see you caught up in something that's really not about you. And there it was. The real shape of it. She has an agenda. You're being used. This isn't about you. Driving a wedge. Testing whether I'd move. I kept my voice completely flat. I appreciate you calling, Greg. Of course, man. I've got customers, I said. I need to go. And I hung up. I set my phone face down on the table. I looked out at Route 9. The bare trees. The cold November sky. The road that I had stood beside every morning for 4 years, in every kind of weather, doing the one honest thing I knew how to do. He'd called me man, twice. The same way he'd sat at my kitchen table 4 years ago and looked me in the eye and pretended to be my friend. I picked up an apple, placed it on the table, placed another beside it, and I waited. The call from Lauren came on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after Greg had called me. I was on Route 9. The girls were in school. The sky was the kind of deep, clear blue you only get in late November, when the cold has burned off everything soft and what's left is just pure light and stillness. I remember that sky specifically because it felt like the right kind of sky for what was about to happen. Like even the weather understood that something was closing. It's done, Lauren said. 2 words. Completely quiet. The way you say something when the weight of it is too large for anything more elaborate. I set down what I was holding. Tell me, I said. She told me. The licensing board had completed their preliminary review. The records request had come back from the county planning office. 7 years of documentation, permits, contractor recommendations, approval signatures. What they found wasn't just Lauren's 3 years. It was a pattern going back nearly a decade. 11 separate projects, 7 different contractors cycling through the same referral structure. Payments that didn't match invoices, approvals that came through within days of contractor agreements being signed, when the standard review period was 3 to 6 weeks. The board had referred the case to the state attorney general's office the previous afternoon. Greg Harlow was under formal state investigation. I stood on the gravel shoulder of Route 9, and I listened to Lauren's voice, and I felt the world level out underneath me, slowly and completely, the way I'd been waiting for it to do for 4 years. "He knows," Lauren said. His attorney issued a statement this morning. Cooperative with the investigation. Confident in the process. The usual. "How long does the investigation take?" I asked. "Months, probably. These things move at their own speed." "But James, the referral itself, that's not nothing. That's not a warning letter. That's the state saying there's enough here to look at seriously." "And the permit? Your project?" "Reinstated," she said. 2 days ago, quietly. The board approved it without comment." I almost laughed. "Of course they did." "Of course they did," she agreed. What happened to Greg Harlow over the following 3 weeks was not a single dramatic crash. It was more like watching a building lose its structural integrity from the inside. Nothing collapsing all at once, just each supporting element giving way one at a time, until the whole thing was simply no longer standing. First, it was the county board. He didn't resign, he was too proud for that. Too committed to the performance of composure. But 2 of his fellow board members quietly requested that he recuse himself from active votes while the investigation was ongoing. It was framed as procedural. Routine. But everyone in that room knew what it was, and Greg knew they knew, and that specific kind of knowing is its own punishment. Then it was Little League. The organization, a volunteer board of parents, most of whom had children who'd played under Greg for years, sent him a letter. Formal, careful, the kind of language people use when they're trying to be fair while also being completely clear. They were suspending his coaching role pending the outcome of the investigation. Greg had built so much of his public identity around that role, around the photos and the games and the community currency of being the man who showed up for the kids, that losing it, even temporarily, even pending, was the kind of thing that strips a face off a person in a small town. People started looking at him differently on Saturday mornings at the hardware store. Not dramatically. No one confronted him. No one made a scene. It was subtler than that. The way conversations shifted when he entered a room. The way certain handshakes became shorter. The way some people found somewhere else to be. Reputation is load-bearing. Lauren had said that. She was right. His new wife, he'd remarried 2 years after Diana, a woman named Carol who everyone described as warm and completely unaware of who she'd actually married, filed for separation in the 3rd week of December. I heard about it secondhand, through the ordinary channels of small-town information. She'd apparently known nothing, had believed fully and sincerely in the version of Greg that Greg presented to the world. When the real version arrived in the form of a state investigation and a cascade of quiet professional humiliations, she packed a bag and went to her sister's house and didn't come back. I felt genuinely sorry for Carol. She was a victim of the same thing everyone else was, the gap between who Greg performed himself to be and who he actually was. Diana called me the same week. Not about Greg specifically, just one of our regular check-ins about the girls. But at the end of the call she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I heard about Greg." "Yeah," I said. Another pause. "James, I'm sorry for all of it." It was the first time she'd said that, not the watered-down, contextless version she'd offered in the early months when she was still half defending herself. This was different, simpler, just the plain words. Plainly meant, "I know," I said. And I did. And it was enough. Lauren brought Cassie to the stand on the 2nd Saturday of December. She hadn't planned it as anything significant. They were just driving around, she said, and Cassie had wanted to see where Lauren went every morning. But when that silver SUV pulled up and Lauren got out and then the passenger door opened, and this 11-year-old girl unfolded herself from the seat, tall for her age, dark-haired like her mother, wearing a green coat and looking at everything around her with enormous watchful eyes, I felt something shift in the air. Ava was the first to speak, obviously. "Hi, I'm Ava. I'm writing a book about this fruit stand. Do you want to be in it?" Cassie looked at her for a second. Then at me. Then back at Ava. "What's it about?" she asked. "About how fruit stand people are actually the most important people," Ava said, with complete sincerity. Cassie considered this with the serious, evaluating expression of someone who takes literary accuracy seriously. Okay, she said. Yeah, put me in it. Lauren was standing a few feet away watching this exchange, and the look on her face was one I will carry with me for a long time. Not just happiness, something deeper and more complicated than happiness. The look of someone receiving something they had genuinely believed they no longer deserved. I walked over and stood beside her. She's great, I said quietly. Lauren nodded, jaw tight, eyes bright. You did good, I said. Paul did good, she said. I'm trying to catch up. You're here, I said. That's not nothing. That's everything. She looked at me then, and I looked at her, and something that had been moving slowly toward us for 2 months arrived fully, without drama or announcement. Just two people standing in the December cold on the shoulder of Route 9, understanding something clearly for the first time. James, she said. Yeah. Thank you. For letting me park here every morning and take up space and process all of this out loud in front of you. Thank you, I said. For buying all my fruit on a Tuesday in October when you didn't have to stop. She laughed. That loose, genuine, slightly watery laugh I'd been collecting since the first time I heard it. Behind us, Mia had appointed herself Cassie's official tour guide and was explaining in thorough detail the structural philosophy behind her tangerine display. Cassie was listening with total, genuine attention, and I stood there on Route 9 under the December sky, with my daughters and a woman who had driven back toward the hard things instead of away from them, and I felt, for the first time in 4 years, not just that I had survived, but that I had landed somewhere. That the long, grinding 4 a.m. work of holding everything together had brought me, without my fully realizing it, somewhere I actually wanted to be. Greg Harlow was somewhere across town facing a reckoning that would follow him for years. And I was here, on Route 9, in the December light. Completely, solidly, finally here. That's the whole story. Or the beginning of the next one. I'm not sure there's always a clean line between those two things. What I know is this. I woke up this morning at 4 a.m., same as always. Loaded the truck. Kissed my daughters on their foreheads. Drove out to Route 9.